Welcome to the Mindset Unleashed Today podcast. My name is Tommy Gucciardo, and I'm excited to share my insights and experiences with you to help you shift your mindset and improve your life. Now, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be exploring different areas of life, discussing how to make positive changes. Now, I'll be doing this by interviewing guests who can provide additional perspectives and their experiences. I believe that by making a mindset shift, we can all unleash our full potential and create the lives we want to live. I hope you'll join me on this journey. Welcome back to the Mindset Unleashed podcast, where we focus on the power of the mind and how it transforms your life on a daily basis. I'm your host, Tommy Gucciardo, and today we have a treat for you. We have somebody that's really instrumental in my life, friend of mine, brother in recovery. He's just a phenomenal person, and he's helped me tremendously along my journey. And, and the thing that Dwight probably doesn't realize is we connected right away. We had a bond right away. He was with a friend of mine who I was really close with, Anthony Birdie, and I was running a marathon, my first marathon. Didn't know Dwight from anything. He showed up at the marathon for me. He was there at my finish line when I crossed the finish line, and it was really emotional for me because it's something that I wanted to accomplish, and I did, and he was there. We hugged. And it's been an 8-year friendship since then. And this guy is, in my opinion, tops. He's, like I said before, he's helped me through so many tremendous times in my life where I was struggling, where I needed help, and he's always a phone call away. And, we actually did a podcast together for a while, two guys from Queens. And, we went our separate ways. We both successful in our own rights. He's written a book. He has his own podcast. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to my friend, Dwight Gillespie.
Thank you, Tommy. I appreciate it. And I remember that, the late Anthony Birdie. And Anthony's been gone a couple of years now. But I remember that guy. He said, my friend Tommy's going to run this marathon. And I thought it was one of the most impressive things I'd ever seen in my life, to be able to do that. And, 26.2 miles. And I watched you cross, man. And that was an impressive thing, yeah. And I remember that. We have been tight since. Yes. It's good to know you. You're good people, Tommy.
You too, my friend. And during that time, we got to know each other. We got, and we created a podcast, which I thought was a great podcast. We had a lot of fun. We have good banter back and forth between one another. But we learned a lot, right? Yeah. And you created your own podcast. I have my own podcast now. You've written a book. So why don't we dive into a little bit about your book? Why don't you tell everybody about your book and why you wrote it and, what the meaning behind it is?
Well, the book itself is, it was written about my son, or it started out about my son. We were in the car accident and it was difficult, as you know, and I got into the accident when I was still using drugs, and my son died that night, and then we lost the baby. My wife was pregnant with my daughter, and we lost the baby 6 weeks later. And the book was really supposed to be about that, just losing him especially, and dealing with that loss and the grief that comes along with it. And then, my editor got involved, and she says, oh, you got to discuss what led up to that, why it was so important and all that stuff. And so it became a lot more than I wanted it to be. Mm-hmm. It really did. But it was too long, but it was necessary, and it talked about my childhood growing up, and growing up 9 people in a 2-bedroom house with 1 bathroom, and, my father's addictions. My father committed suicide when I was a kid, and, so, and that's what it was about. And, it was really tough. And I'm embarrassed to say, I can't think of the name of the book. I'm drawing.
You can't think of the name of your own book?
Isn't that
horrible? How about price tags?
Price tags.
All right, there you go.
I knew it was there somewhere. Isn't that terrible? I'm saying, oh my God, it's my book. It took me a long time to write. Yeah, price tags. And there's a reason that it's called price tags as well, and that is that my belief. Much like you run in the marathon. I watched you do that, and the dedication it takes to do something like that. And we learn in recovery, right? That people talk about. Everybody wants a pill. Give me a pill, make me better, right? And I laugh. Both of us have lost a lot of weight, especially since the podcast. And I was joking. I says, I got a closet full of keto pills and all this other stuff that's, like guaranteed you're going to lose 60 pounds in 3 days and you can still eat like a pig, like.
I like that diet.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah. Unfortunately, it just, I found that if you really want to lose 60 pounds in 3 days, you got to lop off a limb, like, so it doesn't really work. And everything you put in is what you get out. And that works both positively and negatively, and that was the name of the book was, for a price. Because I think I told you, at the 3-year mark after my son died, I remember my cousin asked me, he says, if you had to do it all over again, given the pain you went through, my son died, it was 3 weeks before his 7th birthday. And my cousin asked me, he said, would you do it again? And I didn't even hesitate. Hell yeah. I love my son. Like my son was my life. I know how you are with your kids. Like it's, and my son was my life. He was my life. Like he was my light and everything, man. And losing him was just unbelievable.
No,
and to this day,
I can't even fathom the pain that came from that. Like I have an argument with my kids and I get mad at them for like a day and we don't talk. It's like my whole world is shot. Losing a kid for the your whole life. I mean, it's gotta be. How do you deal with that? Like, how do you get back from that? Besides doing a lot of drugs and
a lot of heroin.
I mean.
Yeah. Well, the heroin stopped working, like so many stories that we hear, I had relapsed, the first time I did heroin, I was 14 years old and, and I had stopped when I was 21, 22. I got clean at that age and then I relapsed. And that's how I dealt with it for a long time. And now it's just, I had to gain a perspective on it. And I remember I did a talk at a conference on grief. They asked me to speak on grief, right? Yeah, come and recount your son's death for us.
Yeah,
sure. Why not? And my father's death and my son's death were the two biggest deaths in my life. And I remember doing the math, like because I like to be prepared. It was like a 40-minute talk, and I had to do on this thing, and so I kind of did the math, and from the time my father whacked himself to the time my son, passed away, it's a 25-year period of time. And I estimated like 1 billion people had died. And I remember I said, I'm pissed at God because I love 2 of them, out of 1 billion. And I remember somebody telling me, like early on in recovery, he said, it was the end of their journey, not the end of yours. Mm-hmm. Like this is theirs. And when I coupled that with the idea, like people die, we're mortal. Like people are going to get sick. We have a mutual friend, Alphonse, who talks about that, right? Is that people we love are going to get sick. People we love are going to die, and these things are going to happen. And to make yourself more spiritually centered so that you can withstand these trials and tribulations that come up. And I honestly came to an idea because I was pissed at God. I remember my sister who really raised me, my sister Nancy, she was like my mom growing up. She took care of us. And my parents weren't, really available. But she said to me something that really helped. She said, God has broad shoulders. It's okay to be pissed. He can handle your anger. He can handle your tears, And it helped because it allowed me to keep a faith in something and still be pissed, and not lose that faith. And that was really helpful. And I came to understand through doing a lot of work and everything that God isn't there to keep bad things from happening. God is there to give me peace and solace in those moments when it inevitably does, because these are eventualities of life, right? Like you're going to go through some shit.
Yeah, you're going to lose jobs, you're going to lose relationships, you're going to lose people,
right.
People are going to die. It's how you handle that stuff and where you go and what you lean on at that point.
And maintaining faith and
because it's easy to go, really dark and really bleak, and we know we've been there.
Look, I mean, my initial reaction was standing in my garage on a milk crate with an extension cord around my throat and hearing voices, and like it was, I lost my mind, man. I really did, and I realized my wife, my ex-wife, but she needed me at the time, and we still have a relationship today, and that's because of the work that I do, she's still kind of, it was a long time ago. It happened in 2005, and she's still lost in it, lost in it, and it's difficult, and we had to go our separate ways, and but we still get along. We share a house.
Yeah, I don't know how you do that.
It's a two family, man. We don't talk a lot, but anyway, yeah, and that's it, though. You know, like, what are you going to do? What are your options, right? We talk about that a lot. Like, at the end of the day, right? What are your options? What, you know, grow or go. And I didn't want to die. At the end of the day, I didn't want to end up like my father. I didn't want to go out that way. And I knew using drugs wasn't working anymore. Like, you know, there wasn't enough dope in the world to take the pain away. And it came to a point where I had to deal with this. Like, right. I'm going to have to confront this eventually. And I did. And, you know, and it's still, hey, look, those days come up.
Listen, you're going to have days. You're going to have memories. You're going to remember something. Something's going to happen, you know.
Yeah.
And it's, like you said, it's inevitable. But, you know, it's how you get through it. And, you know, I don't think your son would want you to be, you know, mourning or you know, go out and kill yourself over it, you know. He'd want you to live a good life.
I met a guy, you know, and this one I was still using too. He was a nice guy, and he talked to me, you know. He said, look, he lost 2 kids, and he told me the story that he was a mechanic. He right around the corner from my house.
Mm-hmm.
And he said he custom built I think it was a 67 Mustang for his son, and he built it. He did everything. And he gave it to him for his 17th birthday. And his son and his daughter went out for a ride in the car, and the brakes went head on, dead, both of them. And he said he drank himself into a stupor for about a year. And one day he realized that his kids were watching him. Like, he got this overwhelming feeling like they're watching you. Stop this, you know, deal with this. And he did. Now, it took me longer than that, but
I believe in stuff like that.
It's Tommy that stayed with me. Like,
yeah, I believe in stuff like that. I feel there's different parts of my life. There was different people watching over me and stuff that happens. I feel like people, you know, I get it. I get that.
Yeah.
You know, when your hair on the back of your neck stands up with stuff like that.
I was really upset. I remember when it happened, the day of the accident, they took my wife and I, we went to the old Booth Memorial. At the time, I think it was Presbyterian. It was one some. And they brought us all there, but they had to evac him to Cornell in Manhattan. And they said, you know, he's got like a 5% chance, and like it was done. And you know, some of my family members went with him because, you know, I broke all my ribs. I broke both both sides of the collarbone and all that. So they wouldn't let me go. And I remember thinking, because you hear all those stories, like, oh, yeah, when my father died, you know, he came to me and all this other stuff. And I kept thinking, like, he's going to come to me. Like, he won't leave without saying goodbye. Like, this is my boy. Like, right. My boy and I, like, you know, we were together all the time. Like, yeah, he was a great kid. And I remember thinking that, and he didn't. You know, my sister Jennifer was the one that told me. She came into, and I could see it, you know. She came in, her face was all red and everything. And I said, he's gone. And she said, yeah, he didn't make it, you know. And I was pissed at him. I really was. And it took me a long time to get over that. It really did. You know, and what I came to realize with that as well was he never left me. Like, he never left. The reason he didn't have to come and visit was because he's right here. Yes. Like, he's this boy is right here. And, yeah, he's a part of my soul, man. You don't just lose that, you know. And I feel so fortunate, you know. I remember talking to my wife after everything, and I told her, I said, well, we're blessed. And, well, what do you mean? What do you mean? And I said, I mean, there's people that their kids go missing and they never hear from them again, and they have no idea. There's other people, like I give part of what I do, part of my process. I give money to St. Jude's. It's just a charity that I highly, highly believe in. And because I remember sitting there after he died and seeing these poor parents with these kids, you know, these kids dying of cancer, and like, you got to sit there and watch a kid die, and you can't do anything about it, right? Man. It's just, you got to watch it. So I give money to these people. And I said, that's how we were blessed. Like, he went, you know, the doctor says, you know, he took it like a man, you know. He wasn't crying. He was okay. You know, he was asking for his mother and myself, but it was relatively painless. He bled out internally. That's what happened to him. And it could have been so much worse. You know, if it was going to happen, I'm glad it happened the way it did. And, you know, for whatever reason we lose people, I don't question that. I have no idea why he had to go. I don't know. You know, there's a little girl Mary Brown. I don't know if you remember that. And I always think of her, man. She was beaten to death right after my son died. I want to say it was January 11th of 2006. It's a little girl in Brownsville, Brooklyn. And I remember sitting there and I all twisted up. You know, my wife, she was in a hospital bed in the dining room like we had to bring a bed in for. And I'm sitting there watching the news. And I had a little TV in there for her to watch. And, you know, again, I was up all night, you know, 8-balling it and, you know, all that. You know the drill, man. And I'm just crying. I'm like wondering why. Like, why did this have to happen? I see this little girl, little face, right? Little Spanish girl come up, see the face on the thing. My son was you know, his mother was Puerto Rican. And so, you know, they had that kind of look. And I'm like, I turn up the sound and I hear this little girl got beat to death. And something came over me. And, you know, you talk about these. I don't talk about this a lot, but something came over me and said, this is why. Like this little girl, they started talking about this little girl's life. This little girl didn't know a moment's peace in her life. Not one moment. She was a beautiful little girl, and she was beaten to death by her stepfather. And left to die on the bathroom floor. Her father, he used to torture her by putting her head under water in a tub and pulling it up, let her take a quick breath and putting it down. And he came up one time with such force that it hit the back of her, base of her skull. And he just like threw her like she was trash on the floor. And I got to tell you, Tom, I could picture my son holding her hand and saying, come on, I'm your friend and nobody's going to hurt you. Like, I get choked up when I think about it because I remember sitting there twisted and like being at peace and saying, that's why it happened. Like, that's why it happened. He had to be there for this little girl. I don't know if it's true or not, but I think that I was given an insight, a gift, a real gift that day to get an idea of why this happened. You know, why did he have to? Because this kid was loved, man. Right. Like he never heard. You know, like I grew up.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about. Yeah. I mean, like, you know, I watch you talk about your son, and I watch you. Like every time you mention him, there's a smile that goes across your face.
That's my boy.
I know, and you always say that's my boy.
Yeah.
But I also know about your personal story. And I know about your upbringing. I know about your parents. Yeah. So, like, how did that relationship with them not transfer over to your son? Because a lot of times that always happens. It keeps transferring to the next person, to the next person.
Yeah, I got lucky. I got out of there. You know, I was clean for a long time. I was clean when my son was born. And I knew better. And I married better than my father did. I did, you know. And look, for all the faults that my ex-wife, and look, we could go, there's a litany. I got a whole, she was a great mom. Like, she was a great mother. And the only reason we decided to have kids together, because we've been living together for years, was that we understood that kid came first. Mm-hmm. That no matter what she and I went through and all that, the baby came first. And for both of us. And he was just such a good kid. I mean, I was so happy to have him, you know. I just remember every night we went for a walk. Hey, Dad, can we talk about things? And I say, yeah, come on, boy, let's go talk. And we go for the walks through the neighborhood and everything. And, you know, his mother was allergic to everything, so he couldn't have a pet, and he would name all the pets. And he knew every dog, every cat, and those were his names, you know, and he never forgot them either. They were all the same. There was a woman who had a dog, and he called it, I don't know, Fluffy or whatever the hell he called it. It's not its name. And, you know, she corrected him and like demanded that he acknowledges. He's like, what do you care what I call the dog? He said, does it matter? Like, you didn't even know what I called the dog up to this point. And he said, it's Fluffy to me, you know. But that's the kind of kid he was, you know. Right. And he was just a great kid to be around. He was funny, smart, and he lit up the room, you know. He really did. But he didn't know any of that stuff, because you're right. You know, like I grew up, you know, you're stupid, you're this, you're that, you're never going to amount to anything. And, you know, I got all that stuff. And it was too many people, too little food, too little money, you know, too little space. And I provided for my, you know, I planned my children better than my parents did. You know, my parents just spit out kids. These are people that shouldn't have had any children. They had 7 of them, you know, like, and that, you know, what are you going to do with that? You know, that's just the way it is. And, yeah. So, yeah, but that was, that the difference was the love and the time. I didn't have 7 kids.
Right.
I think my parents would have been better parents if they had 1 or 2,
Right.
I think of myself, like, I don't know about you, my father was 30 years old. He had 7 kids.
Sheesh.
7 kids at 30 years old. And Jesus,
I have 2 and I go nuts.
I don't, well, he drank and he gambled. I know how he did it.
That's how he did it. That's how we dulled the pain.
Yeah. And that was it. And he had problems. My dad had a lot more psychological problems, I think, than I had. Like I have addiction. I'm an addict. Like I don't question that at all. But my father was a traditionally bipolar guy, up for 3 days. I tell the story. He was an avid reader, much like myself, right? He loved books, history books, and he's reading about was General Grant at Vicksburg in Mississippi. Yeah, and he couldn't picture the battlefield. Here we are in Patterson, New Jersey. My father's like, wakes everybody. Okay, get in the car. Where are we going? We're going to Vicksburg. Like, okay.
Sure.
Just get in the car and drive to Vicksburg, Mississippi. Get out of the car for a few minutes. And, okay, so all right, get back in,
now we can go finish
get back in the car. Yeah, go home. And that was the old man, and that's the way he was. He was overwhelmed. And, and again, and my mother she had her issues as well. And so it was a lot different, and I look at my brothers and sisters, a lot of them have had it tough. Their kids have had it tough. My sister Nancy, the one who raised us, her kids do really well. Mm-hmm. But that's the way she always was. My sister Nancy was 10, 11 years old when she started taking care of 5 kids.
Wow.
And yeah, it was it. And, and she did. And she was tough, man. She was tough. But she loved us and she took care of us, cleaned our clothes, got our meals, sent us off to school. She was the one I ran to, when he got hurt. I ran to Nancy. Nancy took care of me, man. She was my protector.
And what was your mom at that point? Where was she?
Yeah, my mom.
You just didn't rely on her for that?
I knew who my mom was from a very early age. My mom was all about the show, man. It was all about the show. How do we look to the outside world? In the house, we were animals. I mean, just animals, man. And but when we went out, it was the only time my mother was tough on us. We had to appear good. Everything had to look good. And she'd get home, she didn't care, I remember her telling me, like, you should have been a lawyer. I'm like, lawyer? Lucky I'm alive. Like, they never checked my homework or anything. Do your homework? Yeah. Oh, okay. Come on and kiss. And it was it. I would run in the streets from the time, I'm 6th, 7th grade, running out. Used to come in, we had 2 doors. There was a kitchen door. I come in, yeah, good night, and
out the other
right
door.
out the front door, I remember my father nailing it shut one night. It was hysterical. I come home 6 o'clock in the morning and the fucking door.
Couldn't get in.
He nailed it shut. This bastard. He know. Yeah, I got you. Yeah, you did. Anyway, yeah, that was it though. Right. That was life in the Gillespie house growing up, and it was tough. It was a violent, chaotic place, and it shows. I look at my older brother. He's got his troubles, and I haven't seen my younger brother. I mean, it really devastated the family. We don't talk at all. I haven't seen my younger brother. I can't remember the last time I saw him. I know his son passed away. He overdosed not too long ago. But we don't keep in touch. There's just so much pain, and it just blew us all apart. It's funny, you go through a war together, and it does one of 2 things. It either blows you apart or it brings you together.
Right?
And it blew us apart, and it's a shame. It really is. It's a shame. But that's mental illness will do that.
I know.
It's rampant. It's rampant.
So I know you went to the Air Force.
Yeah, it did.
Was that to get away from everything?
Oh, yeah. It's the last thing my dad told me before he killed himself. He said, "Get out of here." He said, "You got to get out of here, man. This place will kill you."
Your dad said that to you?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We got a suicide note from my dad the day before he died, and he mailed it to the house. And I remember coming home because I was already working. It was 2 weeks after I graduated high school. I mean, I went to high school the day after I graduated, probably like you, right? The day after I started my job, I went to work. Like, that's what I did. Mm-hmm. And I remember coming home, and my sister was out there, my 2 younger sisters, and they're like, "Yeah, Daddy sent this letter to the house. He hasn't come home, blah, blah." And he came home, and he was whacked. his fingertips were blue. Like he'd say, he tried to kill himself that day. He took a bunch of downs and he drank a quart of scotch. He threw up all over the place. The old man couldn't handle the pills. Now me,
different story.
I'd have been dead. Handle my pills. But yeah, and then when he came home, I followed him into the house, and yeah, it's the only time I ever cried in front of my father. I mean, I actually sat on my father's lap, and I begged him. I said, "Don't do this," because as difficult as our relationship was, right, as tenuous as it could be, I loved him, and he loved me, and more so than my mother. Like my father loved me. He really did. Like we had a lot of things in common, and we fought a lot, but there was something about I love my father. He was the smartest guy I ever met in my life. To this day, he was brilliant Princeton guy. He graduated from Princeton, and we talked, and I'm like, Dad, you can't, like, don't leave, you know, because as a man, and I say this to young men, right? It's all well and good to have your dad there when you're young, and fathers are extremely important and highly underrated. But the time in my life when I needed my father the most was then. Like, I didn't know what the hell to do, Tommy. I didn't know. What do you do? Right. I'm out of high school. What the you know?
How do I live my life?
Right, that's it.
Yeah.
I barely made it through high school.
Right.
You know, I was smart enough, but I never did the work. I didn't show up, you know, like, you know, making money was more important to me, and working and getting high, you know, like all of that was more important. I'm like, well, what do I do now? Right. I got the piece of paper you wanted me to get. Now what? I don't know. Because neither one of my parents, you know, like they didn't know either. And yeah, and he said, you got to get out of here. And I had already been talking to the Marine Corps and the Air Force. And my father said, take the deal with the Air Force. He said, it's you got to get out of here. And that was a huge difference between me and the rest of my family as well. I was the only one to get out. Like I got out, I left. And it was a really good time to leave because, I mean, everything just fell apart after the old man did what he did, you know. And yeah, but the military was great, and it didn't get me clean. It introduced me to recovery. Right. But yeah, I learned to smoke meth there. I learned to smoke crack. You know.
So it helped you in other areas.
Right. You know, I became a more well-rounded individual. Let's say. Yeah. So, but it is what it is, and no, but they did. They helped me out immensely. They introduced me to the concept of recovery. You know, the military was a great thing. I remember when my nephew became a cop. He's a detective in Manhattan now, and he's like, I said, go join the Air Force. He goes, oh, what, get shot at in Afghanistan? I said, dude, they're going to send you.
Be a cop now?
They're going to send you to the pink houses.
Yeah, that's not
and they
fun.
did. I was like, you know, he started working in Metro at Livonia in Pennsylvania. Was one of his first stations.
Oh, that's fun.
Yes, go ahead. Yeah, at least in the Air Force, you're allowed to shoot back. Yeah. Anyway, but so that was the military was a good way of life. Getting out was a mistake, I think. If I could go back and change one thing, I think I would have stayed and made a career out of it. But drugs were more important.
Right. That's what I was going to say. The drugs probably took over.
Meth was really, really,
really important.
Became a staple in my diet.
Yeah, there you go. All right. Well, once again, thank you for coming.
Thank you, Tommy. Hey, right here, brother.
You got it, brother. All right. Yeah. Thanks for showing up. It was fun having you here.
Thank you.
And you know, I hope you got something out of this. And you know, like I said, if you want to go find Dwight's book, it's a great book. What's the name of it again?
Price Tags.
All right, there you go. I was just testing you. And we'll see you next week. Thanks for coming.